Hello, my name is Alan Miller, and today I will be presenting to you on the topic of bullying and hazing in sports. I've prepared this presentation to be shared with my players, their parents, as well as fellow coaches. Bullying and hazing have many of definitions. Here are two of the common definitions that are found on dictionary.com. Hazing is listed as the imposition of strenuous, often humiliating tasks as part of a program of rigorous physical training and initiation, whereas bullying is defined as seeking to do harm, to intimidate, or to coerce, and this is oftentimes when there's an imbalance of power, or at least a perceived imbalance of power, where one person has the power and the other is vulnerable. I've chosen a video here. It was not loading properly in the slideshow, so I have it on a separate tab here for you. But it discusses the differences between bullying and hazing, and the hazing that takes place in a college sports setting. Of course, it does not just happen in a college sports setting. But I want you to pay special attention to how the coaches, how the researchers, and the players all have a slightly differing view on what hazing actually is. So I hope you enjoy the video.
Bullying and hazing is a nationwide issue that affects the lives of young athletes. It will even follow them into their college careers.
There's a culture in athletics that needs to be changed. Whether you call it bullying, whether you call it hazing, whether you call it rite of passage, rituals, whatever terms you want to use, it's got to change.
There are stories every day about students from middle school right on up through college and into the pro ranks now that people have been bullied or hazed. As much as Division III mirrors the country, I think it's definitely an important issue right now.
The NCAA forbids the act of hazing in college sports. And colleges such as Montclair State list expulsion as a consequence for engaging in hazing. So why is hazing such a big issue in athletics?
I think it's the same theory for sororities and fraternities. You're trying to build a close-knit group of people, and the thought process is if you go through something that's really difficult together and you come out on the other side, it brings you closer. And I think that's true if it's a genuine, difficult situation, but these sort of manufactured hazing rituals, I don't think do anything positive for the person being hazed nor for the people doing hazing.
I do not think bullying or hazing is a big issue. The older guys want to bring in the freshmen onto the team and just get them a part of it. I think serious, nothing hurtful.
You want to fit in, you might be away from home. How do you say no? That's the scary part. You know, that people are putting themselves in harm's way to try to feel like they're going to fit in.
We used to have something called a rookie show. We haven't done that in 30 years because it gets out of hand sometimes. It could put guys on edge with other players, asking them to do something that maybe they feel uncomfortable about and don't want to do. I think it's a whole situation that needs to be eliminated.
I think it would cross the line if kids are starting to get hurt, maybe physically and emotionally, just to tell a freshman do this or that, just for the funny of it, but nothing harmful, I don't think.
I'd like to see it just stop. Nothing. Pick up my pad, rookie. No, nothing.
I don't think that hazing in sports will ever end, because everybody wants to be a part of the team, and the freshmen are going to do what the older guys ask, and the older guys just want to have some fun, build some team chemistry.
Something that's still ingrained in people, and people like to tell stories about how they survived their initiation rite. And I think as long as they have that behind them, I think that there will still be people that want it.
So, as I discussed in the video, the men's soccer player described the hazing as acceptable to a certain point. And that's something that we will talk about here in the upcoming slides, to try to figure out, is there a line or where is the gray area of the hazing rituals that we've come to know? So, through doing research and reading many of articles on the topic, I found a definition that I thought was much more in depth or better than that you saw earlier from dictionary.com. Researchers really struggled with coming up with an actual definition of hazing because it's different for each person. For each person's perception, it could mean something completely different. For example, that young man from the soccer program suggested that hazing wasn't really an issue within his program. However, in other programs, the incoming freshmen, um, that hazing could really impact them in a much more significant way. So, in the research, their whole idea was, can we get this group of professionals together and this group of athletes together, and can we find a thorough definition? And this is what they were able to come up with. They say any potentially humiliating, degrading, abusive, or dangerous activity expected of a junior ranking athlete by a more senior teammate, which does not contribute to either the athlete's positive development, but is required to be accepted as part of a team, regardless of the junior ranking athlete's willingness to participate. This includes, but is not limited to, any activity, no matter how traditional or seemingly benign, that sets apart or alienates any teammate based on class, number of years on the team, or athletic ability. I find that this definition hits on some extremely important parts. For example, the peer pressure of trying to be accepted as part of a team, which might lead the junior ranking athletes, as they put it, to participate or to succumb to that pressure. So our next slides will be on where does that line fall. Here are some team bonding activities versus what could be potentially deemed as hazing. So some more information on hazing. There is legislation in place in 44 of the 50 US states that says hazing is illegal in that state. Now, we did just learn in that video that in the NCAA, it is illegal to have hazing or for hazing to take place. As you also saw, there's a strong disconnect between what the researchers consider to be hazing, what the coaches perceive to be hazing, versus what the athletes believe is to be hazing. One of the statistics that was shown was that 55% of undergraduate students that belong to a club, an organization, or a sports team have experienced hazing in some capacity. I found this very interesting because although this presentation in this study was focused on hazing in sports, it happens frequently in other situations. One that I can recall would be even in our high school band, there were experiences in which the freshmen were treated as lesser than some of the upperclassmen, and had extra responsibilities because that is just how things were, or were tradition in that program. One of the key pieces that I took away from the research was that social media has had a negative impact on hazing. And one might think that drawing attention to hazing might help alleviate hazing. And of course, that could be the case. However, on the other hand, oftentimes hazing or bullying is shown in social media as humorous or to be funny, not to be taken seriously. And so the recipients of that hazing are either um, laughed at, laughed with, or people just laugh at the ridiculousness of the situation. And so I chose this second video to share, just the first few seconds. So hopefully this one will work for us. But this video is titled The Craziest NBA Rookie Hazing Stories. And it has over 3,500 likes, which for a YouTube video may not seem like that much. However, the context would be that this is an acceptable behavior. And oftentimes, some of our more immature athletes or club or organization members might see this as whatever their idea could also be viewed as humorous or harmless. So, hopefully, again, the first 13 seconds of this dramatic, crazy NBA rookie hazing story video will play for us.
Most newcomers in the NBA go through rookie hazing, a fun tradition involves being a personal butler, hilarious pranks, and some public being a personal butler, hilarious pranks, and some public humiliation. Here's a rundown of some of the best rookie hazing stories in NBA history.
I do apologize if the video was very choppy for you there. Um, loading while recording your screen is never an easy thing. Anyway, there are three potential levels of hazing as perceived by coaches, researchers, and athletes. You have subtle comments that may be, for the fun of it, as the young man said earlier. You have hazing that could fall under the category of harassment or harassment. And then you also have the extreme cases that would go under the category of violent. Some common themes I saw as I was reading through the research amongst the student athletes were that the concept of hazing was often associated for them with physical force of some sort. They believed that if the student athlete had consented to participate, then whatever the activity was couldn't be hazing. And then many said, well, hazing is a gray area. And then if the activity is perceived as productive, it also cannot be hazing. And so it was interesting to read how the athletes that are within that culture have a hard time identifying and being specific. And that's why it's so important for us to have that thorough definition that can be shared. Is here is exactly what hazing is, and here is what we can do about it. So more on what we can do to help out with hazing will come in the upcoming slides. So here's the debate between team initiation versus hazing. So some common team initiation techniques, such as the freshmen having to carry their bags and the upperclassmen's bags, to cleaning the lockers or the locker room, which thankfully I never had to experience. That sounds awful. Bringing equipment out or putting equipment away is something that I know within the high school program that I participated in. That was a very common thing. The freshmen always had to carry out the equipment and clean up when we were finished. Another team initiation technique could be telling embarrassing stories or jokes about yourself or about your teammates. And then the final one that was listed was various scavenger hunts, whether that was around the high school to become familiar with the facility That could be around the town. It could have been at a university to become familiar with the different things on campus, things like that. Some of the activities that were deemed as hazing techniques or activities would be wearing embarrassing clothing, well, forcing someone or pressuring someone into wearing embarrassing clothing, performing skits that are designed to make people look foolish, pressuring the rookies or the underclassmen to have bad haircuts, to face paint. Um, One that I witnessed while I was in college was there was a pressure to party or to drink in excess. Um, there's eating gross foods, performing crude acts or sexual acts, and then there could be other physical and emotionally damaging behaviors as well. So that leads me to pose the question that what is your opinion? Where is that line? Where is the that gray area to be between? And truthfully, is this team initiation really worth the pressure or the risk involved in potentially hazing or crossing that line? Just something to think about, as this is something I've battled with over the last few weeks as I've been researching for this presentation. So here's a list of things that we can do about it, whether this is coaches, parents, or athletes. So in a study, there was both coaches and athletes that participated, and they believed that legal repercussions and sanctions need to be clearly defined. And this kind of again refers back to what is the definition of bullying and hazing. And so that these repercussions and sanctions are strong enough to make it not worth that risk. They also suggested an increased role of the veteran players, coaches, administrators, and parents. Um, but to go back and to evaluate what does your team do now in terms of team initiation activities, and evaluate those and see where do they fit, and are they in fact necessary? Is there a better way? A third point was that there's always education and workshops that can be had or participated in for the athletes, coaches, and parents. And then what I really appreciated, and maybe this is the school teacher in me, but an emphasis on all of the student athletes rather than just, all of the students rather than just these student athletes. And this would be in an effort to change the culture of the community or of the school. And as it was mentioned, hazing is not taking place in just athletics. It is happening in many different realms, whether that's in the classroom, in clubs, the various organizations, that it needs to be addressed with all of the students in an effort to raise the bar and really set that precedent of what is important, what is acceptable, and what is honestly expected of them. And so the final thing would be, can we be aware of what your school policy is, what your administrative policy is, what is your state level anti hazing laws, if there are any, and just being familiar with those. So here in Ohio, where I am, we have what's called Collins Law, and it was just signed um, into effect on July 6th in 2021, and it's named after a young man that um, had died in because of hazing or in the act of hazing. Um, so that's very sad, obviously, but it prompted this law to be signed into effect. and it makes hazing a felony. It says the combination of increased criminal penalties, comprehensive reporting requirements, and education and training expectations are also included in that law. And what I like is that it's one of the most comprehensive programs in the country. I found it also refreshing that it states that we have one of the more comprehensive reporting requirements because, as mentioned in the video, the very first one, was that many people that are victims of hazing or are on the receiving end of that hazing don't report it. Whether that's because they don't want to hurt the team, they don't want to hurt players, they don't want to hurt their friends, they don't want to come across as weak or can't handle it, and they want to fit in. And I think it's very important that we, as coaches and as educators, as myself, to create a culture and a community in where we can feel confident talking about these things and reporting what needs to be reported in an effort to be better and to do better. At the bottom of this slide, I have a link here to hazingprevention.org. It was provides a wealth of knowledge. Again, loading while you're recording your screen is never easy, but it lists different prevention resources. It gives you some movies that are good references, academic studies, but it also provides a wealth of other knowledge in how to report hazing as well. I've signed up for their newsletter. I have not received one yet, but I'm excited to read what they have to offer. So now to move on to bullying, which I feel like hazing falls under that category or realm of bullying. So here is a more thorough definition of bullying. I'm not going to read the whole thing. However, I will just kind of hit on some key points. So, bullying is the act of causing harm on any individual by another individual or a group of people that have a sense of that kind of asymmetry of power, is how they word it, but that imbalance that I spoke about earlier. And it says the victims nor the individuals involved in the act of harm, it does not matter what gender or how those people identify or based on their beliefs. Anyone can be a victim of bullying. There are a few different types of bullying. I will reference those here in the upcoming slides, but those are physical abuse, emotional abuse, verbal harassment, social abuse, theft or damage of property, and then, of course, the ever growing problem that is cyberbullying. So again, we have at least 5 different types of bullying. These are the 5 that I chose to talk about. But obviously, there's physical bullying. I think when you think of bullying, this is what most people think of, is the physical bullying, the hitting, the fighting, the pushing, slapping, biting, etc. I did kind of chuckle to myself as I saw biting made the list. That's not something that I often think of as, something that happens frequently. Emotional bullying is something that I see frequently within my students, and that would be the teasing, spreading rumors, making threats, humiliating other students or athletes, and then name calling as well. And I found this interesting because thinking back to my time in high school, um, the upperclassmen gave me a nickname, and at first I thought that was the coolest thing ever because I had made it into their graces, that they considered me a part of the team. However, it was not exactly a pleasant thing. But in that moment, I thought that was what successful meant in joining the team. So that's kind of that initiation feel. There's social bullying, which is isolation from different social groups, exclusion from activities or events, and then non acceptance, which would simply just be kind of that exclusion piece. Property damage and theft. I didn't really think of this during like when I would think of bullying prior to doing this research. But I guess it kind of goes back to that kind of cliche, the bully stealing your lunch money. That would in fact count as theft. It was interesting to connect the dots on that one. And then, as I mentioned previously, cyberbullying is a huge issue. And so that kind of falls under that umbrella of emotional bullying, except it is with the use of technology. Social media um, has really made this an easy um, method of bullying because I think I forget what they called it, but keyboard warriors or people that go in there and are quote unquote trolls can be the worst of the bullying because you would think there's no escape. Or you may think, hey, well, just shut it off. But unfortunately, it's certainly not that easy. So, what can we do about bullying within the realm of sport? And again, educating using a proper and thorough definition of bullying is important because when you just say the word bullying, many people don't take into account each of those five forms of bullying. Again, they might have whatever their perception is based off of their own experiences. So if they've only ever experienced bullying in a cyberbullying fashion, that's what their brain is going to kind of snap to, and they will be a little bit more aware or cognizant of that. Whereas if someone used to get beat up on the playground every day, that's where what their brain is going to automatically think of. So it's important to have that kind of well-rounded, thorough definition of bullying. It's very important that families and communities are involved in the bullying prevention program. This is not something that can just be handled within your team or your classroom for that matter, but needs to be kind of on a broader scale if you want to see overall results. And again, I found it interesting. This was all students or all participants, not only athletes, need to be involved to make an impact on that community culture that we spoke about. Then it's important within this educational presentation to, or as part of that bullying prevention program, that you provide an action plan. So, what are the next steps? So, as an example, when you see bullying taking place, or if you are on the receiving end of bullying, what now? Who do you talk to? What are the next steps to get that ball rolling to get the services that you need? Whether that is a form of counseling, if that's some sort of, um, a break to clear your mind, um, and also to provide consequence for or discussion with the person who is doing the bullying to make a difference. It's very important to have clear expectations and consequences for when things do happen. That's a preventative measure. And then something that I really appreciate is to encourage a sense of accountability. And so if you see something, say something um, and hold yourselves and others to that same level of accountability. And so, similar to the hazing page, I found this link to stopbullying.gov. And again, it provides great resources in terms of how do you start one of these bullying prevention programs. It's got, again, so much information. I can't be too specific, but they've got whole tabs on bullying, cyberbullying, what you can do for prevention. And I really like that it tells you exactly what you need to do. So, adults, when they respond quickly and consistently, they send a message that it's not acceptable. Whereas if over time you keep letting things happen or letting things slide, um, it sets a precedent that that envelope could be pushed or that line can be moved. And we really need to make sure that that line is a hard line, not a line in the sand. I found this three-tiered framework very interesting, and one that could be used to work with hazing and bullying. This is something that I also would use in the classroom. And this is positive behavioral interventions and support, PBIS for short. That's something we use in our classroom. However, what it's suggesting is that the universal prevention is something that affects all three levels of students. So you would have your green zone, which is a majority of the students that maybe don't pose a threat for bullying or hazing. It's very important that they still receive the information. But maybe we don't have to go into such specifics or as in depth. Then you would have your yellow zone, which is a group of students that maybe pose a little bit of a threat for bullying and hazing, or that have some predispositions or scenarios in their lives that might allow them um, or lend them, I should say, to a hazing or bullying type situation. And so to manage this or to work with them, you would create small groups and then you could work with them with a little more emphasis on your goals. But that might be once a week for a small group or something like that. And then you would have your red zone, which would be less than 5% of the students typically. And this would be either very small group, like two or three, to possibly individual interventions or meetings. And again, this would be to accomplish the same goal to get them to the kind of same point that the green zone students might be, that same level of understanding. So again, green, 80% of the students roughly would be kind of the general population. Yellow would be at risk, and then the red would be high risk. And I think this falls into our sports teams a little bit as well. I think knowing the personality of your players, your coaching staff, and other people that impact or will influence your team or be around your team is very important. And so this could be used in a number of ways as well. Most of your players, you might be able to check in with, every other day, every couple of days, have a conversation with them. Some of your players, they need a little bit more frequent interaction with your coach or coaching staff. Then you've got some players that you need to interact with them multiple times every day of training to check in with them, make sure things are going as planned. And then I found the seven C's of the social change model very interesting. Um, Obviously, each of the words will start with a C, but each of these things are interrelated. So, in terms of your group values, those would be collaboration, finding a common purpose. You'd have your controversy with civility. And I think those are all things that within your team, those kind of are how everything works together, or everyone works together. Then you have citizenship that falls under kind of what's based on society and what your community values, especially like in your area. And as you would travel from different communities or areas, just to put it out there, I suppose, if you were to have an inner city public school versus a private school from down the road, or if you were to have the same situation in a rural area where you've got your public school versus a private school, or any combination of those. The cultures may be different, the community values might be different, and that kind of goes to that citizenship piece. And then you have your individual values that kind of come from maybe even your inter household relationships within your family. So kind of the consciousness of yourself, congruence, and commitment. I think we all have experienced players that of various levels of commitment, and it makes a huge difference within your team. The buy-in of everyone really leads to a greater level of success. And this is all well and good to talk about, but how do you actually affect a team culture? I found an article by Dr. Jim Taylor that is titled Build a Team Culture for Athletic Success. I think it is well worth the read. Of course, I feel like some of his comments are very general, um, but I think that's the purpose, is because only really we can tell what our team needs. And so we could take some of those pieces of advice and implement them where we see fit. One of the last things that I wanted to bring up with the topic of bullying and hazing is our coach and athlete dynamics. In one of the research passages that I read, it said that the coach athlete relationship can be considered one of the most important and potentially influential relationships that a young athlete will experience. Coaches may have power over athletes based on their age, gender, knowledge, and access to resources, authority to make choices, and to reward and discipline, as well as their past success. Both the time around these coaches and the influence they have can place great pressure on a youth athlete to tolerate actions that normally would be unacceptable. In specific terms, talking about the imbalance of power has been something that I've referenced multiple times in this presentation. As coaches, we hold a higher responsibility and we have kind of control of that imbalance of power. We've got athletes that want to bend over backwards in order to get more playing time or to perform well or to impress us as coaches, um, or to impress their teammates. And so I found this research passage enlightening because it made me reflect on my relationships with, for example, I coach a high school girls soccer team. And something that I have tried really hard to do is to not even give off a hint of an idea that there is any hazing or bullying based off, or inappropriate relationships, I should say, in any regard between myself and my female athletes. And so, however, it pops up in the news all the time that some coaches um, don't draw that boundary or that line. Um, but that's just one side of things. Um, I know sometimes in an effort to motivate, coaches may say things that could be considered hazing or could be considered bullying. In the heat of the games, in the heat of training, in the heat of being outside and for summer workouts for hours and hours, um, sometimes as coaches we say things that could be deemed inappropriate. without truly meaning anything by it. But it's not exactly our intention that matters, it's the perceived intention that the athlete will have, or that families might have, that is important. So, as a fellow coach, that's something that I pose to you is how can we reflect on how we behave and how we speak to our players, and how we run our programs to ensure that we as coaches are not potentially hazing or bullying our athletes. And then some additional takeaways, and some follow up questions that I had come up with would be, there's so many different relationships that hazing and bullying could take place. You have your coach athlete relationship, like I was just speaking on, but there could be coach and parent relationships where a coach um, pulls a power move over a parent to try to get things handled, and that's obviously inappropriate. Um, I hope no one has had to deal with the parent athlete, or the parent coach dynamic where a parent is hazing or bullying, um, or just harassing a coach or their athlete. Um, the parent athlete one, though, it tears me apart, because the athletes look up to their parents in such high regard, and then for a parent to belittle their athlete, it really strikes a nerve with me. Athlete to athlete, you could have a coach to coach relationship, in which hazing and bullying can take place, as well as administrators, athletic directors, and coaches, and then an administrator or an administrative position to an athlete as well. So, again, the purpose of this whole presentation would be, can we reflect on our practices? Can we prepare for our athletes to provide them the best situation? Our athletes are going to perform the best when they feel supported, when they feel safe, when they feel accepted. And I think as coaches, we really kind of set the bar, set the tone in that regard. I hope that you have enjoyed this presentation. Um, if you have any questions, I believe my email is listed on our Blackboard site. Um, thank you for listening, and I sincerely hope, that you don't have to worry or deal with the bullying and hazing problem that we have found so prevalent in our sports.